3 weeks after moving into what she believed was her dream retirement home, Linda Harper sat alone at her kitchen table and realized she could no longer afford to leave. Not because she was sick, not because she was old, but because the contract she signed had quietly turned her retirement into a prison. She wasn't the only one. By the end of this story, you'll meet 4 ordinary people who thought they had finally found safety, only to discover they had walked into a financial trap so complicated that some lost everything trying to escape it. And the most frightening part? Many communities across America operate almost exactly the same way. Linda used to tell people,
"I finally stopped worrying about money."
She had no idea that was the last peaceful month of her retirement. Linda was 72, a retired elementary school teacher from Ohio. Her husband, Robert, had passed away 2 years earlier. The silence inside their old family house had become unbearable. Then one afternoon, her daughter Karen showed her an advertisement. Beautiful gardens, walking trails, restaurant dining, health care nearby. No more maintenance, no more stress. Live the retirement you've earned. Karen squeezed her mother's hand.
"You deserve this."
The sales consultant greeted them with a smile. His name was Michael Donovan. Friendly, patient, perfectly dressed. He didn't sell apartments, he sold peace of mind.
"You'll never have to worry about the future again."
Linda cried that afternoon, not from sadness, from relief. After years of loneliness, she thought she had found a place to belong. What she didn't know was that Michael had skipped over one small section of the contract, a section almost nobody reads. The entrance fee was $480,000. Michael explained it simply.
"It's not an expense, it's an investment. If you ever leave, much of it comes back."
Linda signed. Karen signed as witness. Neither called a lawyer, neither asked questions, because they trusted him. And why wouldn't they? The brochures looked professional. The buildings were beautiful. The community had won awards. But buried deep inside dozens of pages was language almost impossible for ordinary people to understand. Refunds depended on future resale. Maintenance charges could increase without limit. And if the community experienced financial trouble, residents carried part of the burden. Linda had unknowingly handed over almost her entire retirement nest egg. The lock on the cage had already clicked shut. She just couldn't hear it yet. A month later, Linda met George Ellis, 78, former firefighter, always smiling, always sitting on the same bench. One afternoon, George asked quietly,
"Did they explain the exit fees to you?"
Linda laughed.
What exit fees?
George didn't laugh back. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder. Inside were bills, extra assessments, health care surcharges, maintenance increases. His monthly costs had nearly doubled.
"I tried to leave. They told me I'd lose almost everything."
Linda felt her stomach tighten. Surely there had been some mistake. Surely the contract couldn't work that way. George simply looked down.
"I thought so too."
That night, Linda called her daughter. Karen answered immediately. Linda tried to sound calm.
"I think I made a mistake."
Karen drove over the next morning. They spread the paperwork across the dining table, page after page, paragraph after paragraph. Neither understood half of it. Karen called the community office. Michael answered. His voice hadn't changed, warm, friendly, professional. He explained everything carefully, legally, calmly. Then he said one sentence Karen would never forget.
"Your mother agreed to all of this."
Silence. Linda looked at her daughter. She felt embarrassed, ashamed, like she'd failed her own family. She whispered,
I thought I was protecting all of us.
Karen started talking to other residents. Margaret, a retired nurse. Daniel and Susan, a couple married for 50 years. George. One by one, the stories sounded almost identical. Everyone had trusted the sales presentation. Nobody expected the fees. Several wanted to leave. None could afford to. Some had already borrowed against savings. Others quietly sold family heirlooms. One man had stopped buying medication to keep up with monthly charges. The community looked peaceful from the outside. Inside, fear was spreading room by room, and nobody wanted to admit they had been fooled.
Karen contacted a consumer advocate, an attorney named Rebecca Collins. Rebecca had seen this before. Not fraud, not exactly, something harder to fight. Complex contracts, aggressive sales tactics, optimistic promises, legal fine print. Rebecca explained that many older adults signed during emotional moments, after a death, after a health scare, after loneliness became too heavy. She looked directly at Linda.
They weren't just selling housing. They were selling certainty. And certainty is incredibly valuable when people are afraid.
Linda began to cry because she realized Rebecca was right. She hadn't bought an apartment. She had bought hope.
Karen wanted a lawsuit. George wanted to walk away. Margaret wanted the truth exposed. Linda wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Then another maintenance increase arrived. The room went silent. George folded the letter very slowly.
I buried my wife 3 years ago. I thought this place would be the easy part.
That sentence changed everything. The residents began meeting every week, comparing contracts, sharing stories, helping each other understand. The fear that kept them quiet slowly became courage. The community eventually changed some policies. Lawyers became involved. Consumer reporters started asking questions. Some residents recovered money. Others never did. Linda stayed, not because she wanted to, because leaving would cost too much. But she stopped blaming herself. She started welcoming every new resident personally. And before anyone signed anything, she would quietly say,
Take this home, read every page, and let someone you trust read it too.
she never wanted another family to feel what she had felt. Today, millions of older adults dream about finding one place where life finally becomes simple. A place where the bills stop, the worry fades, the future feels safe. Most retirement communities are built by good people trying to help. But sometimes the most dangerous financial decisions don't arrive with flashing warning lights. They arrive with smiling faces, fresh coffee, beautiful gardens, and a promise that everything will be okay. Linda still sits outside every evening. She watches new couples drive through the front gate. She smiles. Then she whispers something she wishes someone had told her.
Never let loneliness sign a contract your future has to pay for.
If this story reminded you of someone you love, or if you've ever faced a financial decision that felt too good to question, share your experience below. Because sometimes the warning that saves someone else's retirement comes from a stranger who lived through it first.